Fossil is the name given to the remains or traces of a long-dead plant or animal preserved in the Earth's crust since very ancient times. Fossils collected from all over the world are our most important source of information about the living things that once existed on Earth. The skeletons of living things, whose contact with the air was suddenly cut off, have survived down to the present day. Research into fossils permits us to learn about animals and plants, revealing which living things lived during which periods. It also provides evidence of the fact that some creatures, which existed millions of years ago, have remained unchanged to date. According to Darwin's evolutionary theory, whose invalidity has been definitely proven by the fossil record, species are descended from one single common ancestor. The emergence of such very different species took place with minute changes being added onto one another over a very long period of time. According to the theory, single-celled organisms appeared first, and over the course of hundreds of millions of years, these first developed into invertebrate marine creatures, and later into fish. These fish then moved onto dry land, giving rise to reptiles. According to the same claim, birds and mammals then evolved separately from reptiles. If all this were true, then a very large number of intermediate forms of species must have once existed, as one life form supposedly evolved into another. For example, if reptiles really evolved into birds, then billions of half-reptile, half-bird forms must once have lived. These intermediate forms would have had incomplete, non-functional wings. It was Darwin who originally named these hypothetical imaginary creatures intermediate forms. He knew that if his theory was to be verified, then the remains of these intermediate forms would have to be unearthed in the fossil record. In his book, The Origin of Species, Darwin wrote, "If my theory be true, numberless intermediate varieties, linking most closely all of the species of the same group together, must assuredly have existed. Consequently, evidence of their former existence could be found only amongst fossil remains." However, Darwin was also well aware that the fossil record contained absolutely none of his intermediate forms. That's why he devoted a special chapter in his book to the matter, where he posed these worrisome questions. Why, if species have descended from other species by insensibly fine gradations, do we not everywhere see innumerable transitional forms? As by this theory, innumerable transitional forms must have existed. Why do we not find them embedded in countless numbers in the crust of the Earth? Evolutionists seize on fossils as very important in terms of being able to establish relationships and point out developmental similarities between them and today's living life forms. They look to the fossil record to verify their claims that species evolved gradually from one another. Yet, although 80% of the fossil record has now been unearthed, they still have not a single piece of evidence to offer. For that reason, in an attempt to prove their theories, some evolutionists have attempted to manufacture their own fossils, and these have later been realized to be forgeries or distortions. The Earth's fossil layers actually prove that living things have existed in their perfect forms ever since they were first created. Neville George, a Glasgow University professor of paleontology, admitted this many years ago. There is no need to apologize any longer for the poverty of the fossil record. In some ways, it has become almost unimaginably rich, and discovery is outpacing integration. The fossil record, nevertheless, continues to be composed mainly of gaps. Niles Eldredge, the famous Harvard University paleontologist, expresses the invalidity of Darwin's claim that the reason why no transitional forms have been found is the insufficient fossil record. The record jumps, and all the evidence shows that the record is real. The gaps we see reflect real events in life's history, not the artifact of a poor fossil record. Whenever the fossil record is mentioned, most people mistakenly assume that there is a positive relationship between the record and Darwin's theory. However, an article in New Scientist by David Raup, a professor of geology from Harvard, Rochester, and Chicago universities, refers specifically to this error. A large number of well-trained scientists outside of evolutionary biology and paleontology have unfortunately gotten the idea that the fossil record is far more Darwinian than it is. This probably comes from the oversimplification inevitable in secondary sources, low-level textbooks, semi-popular articles, and so on. Also, there is probably some wishful thinking involved. In the years after Darwin, his advocates hoped to find predictable progressions. In general, these have not been found, yet the optimism has died hard, and some pure fantasy has crept into textbooks. The American paleontologist Stephen Stanley describes how this aspect of the fossil record is ignored by the Darwinist dogma that dominates the scientific world, and how that dogma persuades others to ignore the facts too. The known fossil record is not, and has never been, in accord with gradualism. What is remarkable is that, through a variety of historical circumstances, even the history of opposition has been obscured. As the biological historian William Coleman has recently written, the majority of paleontologists felt their evidence simply contradicted Darwin's stress on minute, slow, and cumulative changes leading to species transformation. Their story has been suppressed. The oldest stratum in which fossils are found is the Cambrian, estimated at between 530 and 500 million years old. Apart from single-celled organisms, no fossils have been discovered in any strata older than the Cambrian. In the Cambrian period, a number of very different species appeared suddenly. More than 30 species, such as jellyfish, starfish, and snails, emerge all at once. Contrary to the assumptions of the theory of evolution, these creatures possessed very complex bodily structures, rather than simple ones. Trilobites, with their hard shells, segmented bodies, and complex organs, are a good example. Their abundant fossils have made it possible for detailed research to be conducted on the trilobite's eyes. This structure is made up of hundreds of tiny combs, each one of which contains a double lens. This structure is a marvel of creation. The trilobite's eye is the earliest known eye on Earth and definitely refutes the Darwinist claim that living things evolved from the simple to the complex. On this subject, David Raup, a University of Chicago paleontologist, says that the trilobites used an optimal design which would require a well-trained and imaginative optical engineer to develop today. In addition, this same ocular system has survived right down to the present day, unchanged over 530 million years, and can still be seen in such insects as bees and dragonflies. According to the theory of evolution, species have evolved from simple forms to more complex ones. Yet there are no other complex forms prior to trilobites and other Cambrian creatures, which appeared suddenly. Coming into being with no forerunners preceding them. The British zoologist Richard Dawkins, the best-known contemporary proponent of the theory of evolution, makes the following confession. It is as though they, Cambrian creatures, were just planted there, without any evolutionary history. This totally invalidates the theory of evolution, because, in The Origin of Species, Darwin wrote, "If numerous species belonging to the same genera or families have really started into life all at once, the fact would be fatal to the theory of descent with slow modification through natural selection. This blow that Darwin so feared is dealt by the Cambrian period, right at the beginning of the fossil record. Because the living species in strata from after the Cambrian also appear suddenly, again with fully formed structures. Basic living classes such as fish, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals, along with hundreds of thousands of species within those classes, emerged on Earth all of a sudden, and all perfectly formed. Among them, there is not a single intermediate form of the kind dreamed of by evolutionists. Another example that shows that life did not develop from the simple to the complex, but was already exceedingly complex the moment it appeared, is the shark, which the fossil record shows to have appeared around 400 million years ago. This creature possessed the very superior ability to replace its lost teeth. Yet many creatures that lived millions of years after it lacked this property. This is incontrovertible proof that the shark did not evolve from the simple to the complex. The fact the vertebrate mammalian eye and that of the invertebrate octopus, which species emerged hundreds of millions of years earlier than the mammals, resemble one another and have the same complex structures and systems is still more evidence. All these examples demonstrate that there is no developmental progression from the simple to the complex in living species. This fact has been observed from analysis of morphological, functional, and genetic studies of living organisms. In terms of shape and size, for example, many creatures from earlier strata, such as dinosaurs, are far larger than others that appeared after them. We see exactly the same thing in terms of functional systems. in terms of its structure, the ear is one example that refutes the supposition of development from the simple to the complex. Amphibians have a middle ear cavity, yet reptiles, which emerged after them in the fossil record, have a simple hearing system based on one single small bone and possess no middle ear cavity. Genetic research produces similar results. Studies have shown that the sequence in chromosome numbers does not reflect living organisms' complexity. For example, human beings have 46 chromosomes. The copepod crab only 6, yet the microscopic life form Radiolaria a massive 800. This fact alone proves that there was never any evolution, in either functional or morphological terms, from the simple to the complex. The evolutionist paleontologist Mark Zarnecki admits as much. A major problem in proving the theory has been the fossil record, the imprints of vanished species preserved in the Earth's geological formations. This record has never revealed traces of Darwin's hypothetical intermediate variants. Instead, species appear, abruptly, and this anomaly has fueled the creationist argument that each species was created by God. There is no difference between fossils hundreds of millions of years old and many specimens of these same organisms still in existence today. Their remaining unchanged completely invalidates the theory that maintains that living things are in a constant state of change and that they constantly develop as a result of chance. Yet the fossil record demonstrates the exact opposite. The very first fish, reptiles, or mammals that emerged on Earth are exactly identical to present-day fish, reptiles, and mammals. Some species have become extinct, but no species has ever morphed into another. This demonstrates that God created living species independently, and that living things have never undergone any evolution since the day of their creation. We may list a few of the many examples of this. A 100-million-year-old ant embedded in amber is identical to modern-day ants. This shrimp-like creature, bearing the scientific name Triops cancriformis, has remained unchanged for 300 million years. A 400-million-year-old sea star is indistinguishable from a living specimen. A 355 to 295 million-year-old dragonfly fossil is identical to those species living today. There is no difference between wasp fossils millions of years old and wasps alive today. A 190 million-year-old crocodile fossil compared with a living specimen. A tortoise that has undergone no changes, and a 50-million-year-old fossil tortoise. There is no difference between a 195-million-year-old fossil shrimp and those alive today. The alleged evolution of plants is also no more than a myth. On the screen can be seen a living specimen of the plant Acer monspesulanum and a 30-million-year-old fossil. Fossils of the invertebrate mollusk, known as the chambered nautilus, frequently encountered in today's seas, are also found in Cambrian strata dating back 520 million years. The nautilus has undergone no evolution from the time of its creation down to the present day. A fossil fish dating back 200 million years shows no difference between the old fish and those living today. The theory of evolution maintains that living things developed from simple forms to the more complex. This is a prejudice that does not reflect the truth. In order to see just how unrealistic this claim is, let us consider one creature that evolutionists claim to have developed from a simpler form, the fish. If you examine any species of fish, you will see that in order to swim, all it has to do is wave its tail. Under normal conditions, when the tail is moved in one direction, the head should be pushed in the other direction with equal force. Yet this is not what happens. Fishes' bodies have been created in such a way as to eliminate this effect. At the same time during movement, a vertical force acts on the head. All this causes the oscillation of the fish's head in the water to be less than that of its tail. This difference enables the fish to move forward through the water. How quickly the fish moves forward depends on how rapidly its fin moves to the right and left of the axis passing through its backbone. The speed increases as the fin nears the axis and decreases as it moves away. Just how efficient is this system? Observations have revealed that when a fish that's hanging immobile in the water, once frightened, is able to move at a very high speed. From a complete rest, some small fish can reach their top speed in as little as 1/20th of a second. They can produce a propulsive force up to 4 times their own weight. There's an additional point that we mustn't ignore. Fish exhibit this impressive performance in water, whose resistance is higher than that of air. Bearing that in mind, you can see just what a superior performance this is, and some species of fish exhibit it even against the current. Salmon are definitely the most excellent example of this. Salmon reaching the sea can spawn, and thus ensure the survival of subsequent generations, only by reaching the same river where they were hatched and laying their eggs there. In order to reach their spawning grounds, therefore, salmon have to constantly swim upriver against the current. They also have to overcome waterfalls that stand in their way, and often must leap up to 4 meters forward and 2 meters above the water's surface. During these leaps, salmon leave the water at a speed of 24 kilometers an hour. The impact at the end of such a leap would be fatal to many creatures. But after such falls, salmon continue on their way unharmed. Did they not possess muscular and skeletal systems capable of making such leaps, they would of course be unable to survive. We know that fish do not move forwards only. They cannot survive without being able to move up and down. This problem is overcome with another structure that God created in them. Thanks to the swim bladders in fishes' bodies, they are able to sink to the bottom or rise up to the surface. When a fish descends to the depths, the physical effects of the water on it change. It adapts to different conditions at these various depths by reducing or increasing the amount of air in its swim bladder. In addition, fishes' centers of gravity are generally positioned so as to pass their swim bladders. In this way, in the event that it loses its balance, only very small movements of its fins are needed to restore the fish to its desired position. Most fish are covered in a very resistant skin, consisting of an upper and a lower layer. The upper contains glands that secrete mucus, whose slippery or sticky texture helps reduce friction to a minimum as the fish moves through the water. This permits fish to move faster. Moreover, this slippery property makes it harder for predators to hold on to the fish if they seize it, while also protecting it against far tinier predators in the form of infectious microbes and microscopic organisms. In their outer skins, fish also have a keratin-like layer that prevents water entering the body and maintains a stable balance between the pressure inside the fish's body and that in its external environment. Were it not for this layer, water would enter the fish's innards and cause its death. As we have seen, many systems must coexist in order to facilitate fish's movement through water. The structures and functions of these systems are entirely different from and independent of one another. Yet any one is of no use without all the others, and any deficiency will spell death for the animal. For example, the mucus fluid must maintain specific levels of slipperiness and stickiness, and at the same time must also have antimicrobial properties. The fact that all these conditions are met, and not in an enormous chemical plant, but in a layer just a few millimeters thick under the fish's skin, is a definite miracle. These features, requiring great knowledge and skill, are just some of the proofs that God has created all these species of fish. God reveals the infinite nature of His might in verses. Imagine yourself in a huge crowd, standing shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of people. Everyone wants to move at random, to right and left, constantly, and what's more, in pitch darkness. Could you move without bumping into anyone else? Of course not. These movements, quite impossible for us, are easy for fish, because they have been created with a sensory system known as the lateral line, which consists of points or dotted lines stretching along both sides of the body. Sensory cells are located in a canal beneath the skin. The fish immediately determines the slightest change in external pressure. Eddies in the water, the strength and direction of the current, all thanks to these lateral lines. It can therefore perceive the presence of an enemy or an obstacle before it sees it. It can locate prey or predators and find its way in the water currents. The lateral lines are particularly sensitive to low-frequency vibrations nearby. So fish can instantly detect footsteps along the shore or a predator driving under the surface of the water and take appropriate evasive precautions. Nearby objects reflect the waves reaching them. In this way, the ripples that return after a wave strikes the shore reach the fish's body at very narrow intervals. Thanks to its lateral lines, the fish analyzes these time differentials and forms an image of its surroundings from the information thus obtained. To obtain more information, the fish can simply swim faster and give rise to more waves. The system functions so perfectly as to let fish perform a highly detailed scan. For example, in order to be able to see in the totally pitch-dark water in which it lives, the Mexican blind cavefish is totally dependent on its lateral lines. Despite having no eyes, it can detect objects smaller than a pinhead. Fish swimming in large schools, particularly in muddy waters with low visibility, make use of their lateral lines in order to maneuver quickly without bumping into each other. These sensory organs have a very complex structure, and it's of course impossible for such a system to form by chance, gradually, over the course of eons. The system has to emerge all at once if fish are to survive. This clearly supports the fossil record, revealing that fish did not come into being by evolving through gradual changes, as evolutionists claim, but when God created them, flawless and perfect. If evolutionists need to show that one species turned into another, then they need to produce evidence in the form of fossils of intermediate forms that show these different species allegedly evolving into one another. Any theory that maintains that jellyfish developed into fish, fish into reptiles, and reptiles into birds and mammals must unearth fossils to demonstrate that this actually occurred. Darwin admitted as much, but wrote that there must be countless specimens of such fossils, although none were actually available at the time. Yet in the intervening 150 years, no intermediate form has been discovered. There are some 100 million fossils from all over the world in thousands of museums and collections. Each of these belongs to a species separated from every other by definitive features and unique structures. No fossils of half fish, semi-amphibians, half dinosaur, half birds, or half ape, half humans of the kind sought by evolutionists have ever been found. The evolutionist fossil expert Derek W. Ager admits as such. The point emerges that if we examine the fossil record in detail, whether at the level of orders or of species, we find, over and over again, not gradual evolution, but the sudden explosion of one group at the expense of another.